I remember the first time the air between us changed. It wasn't sudden, more like a quiet shift I didn't notice until everything already felt different. The silence that night had weight to it, thick and impossible to name. She stood by the window, wearing one of Dad's old shirts. It hung loosely on her frame, brushing just above her knees. Moonlight spilled across her like water, softening every line until she looked almost unreal. When our eyes met, she didn't move. Her voice, barely more than a breath, broke the stillness. "Go to bed, Josh. It's late." But there was something in her expression, a tiredness, a distance, that kept me frozen there. I didn't know what I was waiting for. I just knew I couldn't leave. I never meant for things to blur the way they did. When Dad married Nicole, I was 19, caught between boyhood and something I didn't yet understand. He'd met her on a business trip in Colorado, and within months, she was here, turning our house into something brighter, cleaner, emptier. The old photos disappeared from the walls, replaced by new ones, new smiles, new memories, the kind that quietly rewrite history without asking permission. Nicole was hard to ignore, mid-30s, poised, graceful. She carried herself with the kind of calm that made people listen when she spoke, and notice when she didn't. Her eyes were green, steady, searching. Not cold, but observant. The kind of gaze that made you feel seen in ways you didn't expect or ask for. She wasn't the kind of woman who needed attention. She just existed in a way that drew it, quietly, inevitably. I kept telling myself the discomfort would fade. That time would fix whatever this strange unease was. But then Dad left for a weekend retreat with his law firm, and it was just the two of us. She offered to make dinner. I should have declined. I didn't. The kitchen felt smaller than usual, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly too loud. She moved easily, deliberate, graceful even in the simplest gestures, reaching for the salt, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She poured me a glass of juice, the light catching the rim as she slid it across the counter. We talked about nothing, classes, work, plans that didn't matter. And yet, every pause stretched just a little too long. Every silence seemed to carry something beneath it, something unspoken that neither of us dared to touch. When she laughed, it was quiet and careful, as if she was afraid of breaking the moment. I found myself studying her, the faint lines near her eyes, the way her voice softened when she said my name. At one point, she looked up from her plate and held my gaze a second too long. I felt it, the invisible pull of something we shouldn't have acknowledged. Later that evening, she joined me in the living room. She sat at the far end of the couch, legs folded beneath her, hands resting neatly in her lap. The television flickered, casting faint shadows across her face. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, without looking at me, she said softly, "Do you hate me for marrying your dad?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I said. "I don't hate you." She exhaled a quiet laugh, though it didn't sound amused. "You barely talk to me," she murmured. "It's like I'm not even here." I hesitated, feeling my throat tighten. "I just don't know where I fit anymore." She turned her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know where I fit either." That was the moment something inside me shifted. For the first time, I didn't see her as my father's wife. I saw a woman trying not to disappear, someone quietly unraveling behind polite smiles and perfect posture. Someone human. The room felt different after that, charged, fragile, dangerous. That night, long after I went to bed, I lay awake listening to the faint creak of the floorboards below, the wind pressing against the windows. I told myself to forget the look in her eyes, the softness of her voice, the strange ache that followed me up the stairs. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was the moonlight catching on the loose fabric of Dad's old shirt, and the silence that had started to mean something neither of us could name. Later that night, she joined me in the living room. She sat at the far end of the couch, her posture composed but thoughtful, like she was carefully arranging herself within the silence. The air between us was heavy, thick with things neither of us dared to name. Her voice came quietly, breaking the stillness. "Do you hate me for marrying your dad?" I looked up, caught off guard. "No," I said. "I don't hate you." She nodded faintly, eyes falling to her hands. "You barely talk to me," she murmured, her voice soft, almost trembling. "Like I'm invisible." I hesitated, my throat dry. "It's not that," I said finally. "I just don't know where I fit anymore." Her lips parted, as if she'd been holding her breath. "I don't know where I fit either," she whispered. Something in that moment shifted. The distance between us didn't close, but it changed. I stopped seeing her as just my father's wife. She was no longer this perfect figure that floated through our home. She was someone real, someone fragile, wearing her loneliness like perfume. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house seemed louder: the ticking of the clock, the soft hum of the heater, the faint whisper of the wind. I got up and went downstairs. She was there, by the window again, wrapped in one of Dad's shirts. It hung loosely on her frame, the fabric moving gently with the draft. The moonlight draped over her shoulders, outlining her like a secret the night wanted to keep. When she turned, our eyes met. Neither of us spoke for a heartbeat that felt endless. Then, in a low voice that trembled slightly, she said, "Go to bed, Josh. It's late." But I didn't move, and she didn't either. There was something unspoken in that silence, a fragile thread stretched between guilt and understanding, pulling tighter with every second. The days that followed moved slowly, as if time itself was afraid to touch what had happened. She went back to her usual calm, smiling, asking polite questions, pretending everything was ordinary. Yet every look, every pause in her words, carried something heavier, something we both pretended not to see. One morning, she made pancakes. The scent of butter and vanilla filled the air. She hummed softly to herself, hair still damp from the shower, light catching on the curve of her neck. "Thanks," I said quietly when she handed me a plate. She smiled faintly, but didn't meet my eyes. "Don't thank me," she said. "We're family." I couldn't tell if it was a reminder or a warning. By Sunday night, Dad was back. The house came alive again with his stories and laughter. Nicole sat beside him at the table, smiling, nodding, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the perfect picture of warmth and devotion. But when I walked past her on my way upstairs, she brushed against me, just barely, and whispered so low only I could hear, "Did you sleep well this weekend?" My heart stuttered. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. She turned back to Dad as if nothing had happened, laughter slipping easily from her lips. But I knew better. That whisper wasn't just a question. It was a memory, a confession, a quiet reminder of the line we had already crossed without meaning to. The weeks that followed blurred together. I started staying out late, taking extra shifts, finding any excuse not to come home. But no matter how hard I tried to keep my distance, she was still there, in small ways that felt impossible to ignore. Little notes on the counter. "Eat something. Laundry's done. Don't forget your charger." Each one signed with a tiny smiley face, a trace of care that lingered longer than it should have. Then came the night everything changed. The storm outside was merciless. Wind howling, rain hammering the windows, the power flickering like a heartbeat unsure if it should go on. I was in the garage, hunched over my bike, the smell of oil thick in the air, when the door creaked open. Nicole stood there, soaked, barefoot, shivering. "I locked myself out," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the storm. I handed her a towel, trying to stay composed, to keep my eyes anywhere but on her. She stood there for a moment, wrapped in the towel, rain still glistening on her hair, and then she whispered, almost to herself, "I miss being seen, really seen, not as an accessory, not as something to show off, just seen." The words hit deeper than I wanted them to. I looked at her, the woman who had always seemed so sure of herself, and saw the exhaustion behind her calm. The kind of loneliness that doesn't scream. It just sits quietly until someone finally notices. "I see you," I said. For a long second, we stood there in the dim light, the storm raging just beyond the walls. Two people suspended in a silence that said more than either of us could. She reached out then, her hand trembling slightly as her fingers brushed my cheek. Her touch was fleeting, filled with apology and something dangerously close to affection. "This isn't right," she murmured, stepping back. "I know," I whispered, but we both understood. It was already too late. The next morning, everything was normal again. Too normal. She smiled, poured coffee, sat beside Dad like nothing had changed, but her eyes avoided mine completely. That became our new routine. Smiles for him, silence for me. Until one afternoon, I came home early. She was in the laundry room, her back turned, shoulders trembling. When she turned, her mascara was smudged, her expression raw. "He forgot our anniversary," she said with a shaky laugh. "Rescheduled it like a dentist appointment." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, useless, watching her try to hold herself together. Then she stepped forward suddenly and hugged me, tight, desperate. "You make me feel like I still exist," she whispered against my shoulder. That was the night everything truly shifted. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, too quiet. Just a look, a hesitation, a truth neither of us wanted to name. But it was enough to tilt the ground beneath us. After that, we lived on the edge of something fragile, pretending not to see how close we were to breaking it. Then one evening, everything came crashing down. Dad found my phone. There was a photo, one I'd taken by accident. Nicole in the yard, hair tangled by the wind, smiling at something I'd said. It wasn't posed. It wasn't innocent either. "Why do you have this?" he asked. I froze. No words came out. Before I could speak, Nicole's voice cut in, steady and smooth. "It's for my birthday slideshow," she said, but Dad's eyes lingered, cold and suspicious. From that night on, nothing felt the same. His gaze followed us everywhere, and she pulled away. She erased it all. Every conversation that lingered too long, every glance that lasted a second too many. It was like watching someone disappear in slow motion. Then, the night before I left for college, she knocked on my door. Her voice was quiet. "I shouldn't be here." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not," I answered. She smiled, a sad, fleeting smile, full of everything we couldn't say. "Take care of yourself, Josh," she murmured, "and don't forget who you are." Then she turned and walked away, the sound of her footsteps fading into the kind of silence that stays with you long after it ends. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself in grand gestures or happy endings. Sometimes it hides in guilt, in silence, in the spaces between what's right and what's real. She said it was wrong. Maybe it was. But the truth is, we both let it happen, quietly, helplessly, because, for a brief moment, it made us feel alive.